Hello again, and welcome to another behind-the-scenes look at Titansgrave, Geek and Sundry's new tabletop RPG show. I'm your host, Stefanie Woodburn, and today we are all about character creation. We'll ask Hank Green, Alison Haislip, Yuri Lowenthal, and Laura Bailey about the unique cast of adventurers they have created and find out about their backstories. Let's take a look. Can you share with us a little bit about what inspired you to go with certain choices?
Well, so I have never played a dice-based RPG game before in my life. And so I informed the powers that be about that when they asked me to be on this show. And they were like, no, it's fine, we'll send you some reading material. And so they sent me this 28-page document on how to create your character. Just how to make the character. It was 28 pages. So I took one afternoon, I was like, okay, and I sat down and studied this thing. I was like, all right, I understand the concept and how the numbers work and the math and all that stuff. And I was leaning towards an elf, like a rogue style elf was what attracted me, I think, because, I love Legolas and The Lord of the Rings, and that seemed to be, yeah. And then when we actually got here our first day and Will described the world to us in this fantasy, sci-fi mashup, it made me start to rethink what I initially come in with, and on a whim I had asked Will if we could have mixed race characters, because it seemed like a world where that could happen. They all live together, so I was like, oh, maybe there's orcs fall in love with humans and that kind of thing. And he was like, yeah, why not? And I was like, oh, and as soon as he said that, it just totally changed my mind. I mean, I still like the elf idea, but then I was like, what if I mix an elf with a dwarf? They're infinite, they're just always known as being mortal enemies. And I knew I wanted more elven qualities, but Will kept being like, well, what's the dwarf side? What's the dwarf side? And I was like, well, she never grows tall like an elf. That's how they really find out that she's not full elf, is because she stays very short, way under 5 feet tall, like a dwarf. And then she's aggressive too, like dwarves, and that's her dwarf side.
I created a character. Her name was Lemley. She's a teenage girl who is an amazing fighter and just doesn't have much of a filter. She had a really troubled past. She blew off her arm and her leg in an explosion, and she never tells people that she damaged a lot of her body as well. I just thought it would be awesome to have some cyborg parts, and so I asked them if I was allowed to, and they said, yeah, we can make that work, and so we went with it. I think having the arm and the leg be so prominent and saying I can fight with these, I can put these out here, and then having this part of her that's also mechanical and being scared to share that, it shows how delicate she actually is, even though she doesn't want to show it.
So I went on Twitter and I asked people to give me a letter for, I said basically choose M or F. And the first person who replied chose the character's gender. So she's female, and because that person said F. And then I went through and the same way I had them choose her race. So she was Saurian, and I had them choose the class of society that she lived in, and she ended up being lower class. And her profession, and she ended up being a performer.
Were your Twitter followers aware that
they had no idea.
You build the character?
Well, no, I did say,
it's just random questions.
They didn't know what they were picking, but I said, I'm building a character for an RPG.
What aspect of your character did you resonate with the most, and what did you resonate with the least?
Ankia and I are both kind of shrewd. That's sort of a thing that's inside of me, and shrewd as in, if there's an opportunity, it's very difficult for us not to take it. But she is very wary, very skeptical, very mistrusting of everything. Whereas I am the exact opposite of that. I honestly believe that 99% of people are fundamentally good, and that the world is a nice place, and that over time it trends toward better lives for more people. So we're very different in that respect.
Creating a character for this game in particular was really interesting, because when I used to play Dungeons & Dragons, I would always want, it was always that wish fulfillment. I wanted to be the super cool elf, or the, human ranger, who's, badass. And And I never chose like wizard. You know, I never played a magic user the whole time. I think, you know, I had all these other characters. I had, you know, rangers and monks and, you know, fighters and paladins. But for this game, I knew it was going to be, because Will was directing it, I knew story and character were going to be huge. And so I thought this time, rather than trying to make the perfect, you know, most flawless character, I was going to try to make a character with a lot of conflict and a lot of problems and a lot of backstory and a lot of issues. So going into it, I picked, you know, half orc, half Saurian. And I knew from the brief history we got of the world of the game that the Saurians were the ruling class. Now the orc, you know, orcs have always been lower class. What an interesting mix that would be. And how did that happen? And as soon as I started asking questions about, well, how did that happen? Then the character really started to come to life and have its own very, you know, mix of, you know, having been brought up wealthy, but still having those orc ties and feeling guilty about that. It, you know, it made for interesting, you know, quests for my character or goals for my character. You know, my brother disappears, and, you know, when I was younger, and then part of my quest or part of my goal as a character is to someday find him. You know, all our characters are, you know, outcasts and broken in a way, which is something we didn't sort of get together and agree on or decide, or, you know, Will didn't say, hey, I want to make sure that your characters all have this in common. They all ended up being that way, and it brought us together in an amazing, you know, into this amazing family that worked out really well.
Thanks for joining us on our behind-the-scenes look at the cast of Titansgrave, Ashes of Volcana. Please remember to share, like, and subscribe for more episodes of Titansgrave. I'm Stefanie Woodburn. You can find me on Twitter at Stef Woodburn, S-T-E-F Woodburn.